Hi class, this is Mr. Clancy, and I'm here to talk about some ecosystems. We're learning about ecosystems through our Eco Column Lab project, and also we want to address some key concepts and fundamentals. This will follow pretty closely with Chapter 5 in your Bodkin book, and this is our main textbook. I'm going to pop this on. I've decided to use these notes that I have from it. I figured I would talk through this with you and make annotations with you. Basically, I think by hearing my voice and talking about it will help you. Also, I will pop a copy of this on Academy Central under module number 2 for you, which is our Living World module. And I'm just going to circle some of the things that I think are very important here with it. I thought, by the way, we got off to an excellent start in this unit with the columns, so eco columns. So I'm looking forward to seeing those results. Anyway, a couple of key stuff. When you see case study, this is usually in the textbook. So I'll let you go through that. We'll discuss this a little bit next week, but you can see one key term here is a keystone species. And that's a species. We'll see some examples of these, but you can see they basically have they're like the boss, if you will, of a particular ecosystem. They basically exert major control over really all the other species. The otter example is a classic. You can see this single species, whether it's there or not, has a big impact on really the structure of the community. And we'll define some of these terms below. The interactions are sometimes difficult to predict, but hey, we'll go through. So keystone species, kind of like the big cheese, if you will, of a particular ecosystem. And then in terms of some of the characteristics, you can see sustained life on Earth is a property of ecosystems. This is a key aspect here. No species can survive in the absence of other species. So there's definitely some interrelationships there with species, which are really critical in an ecosystem. All right. Now, in terms of some basic characteristics, let's talk through a few of these. Some of these you might be familiar with to a degree anyway, but basically one would be I can enlarge this for you. You can see they're the living things, all right, and their physical environments. Let's do a couple of things for this. The living things would be called biotic, B-I-O-T-I-C, and these would be like, I'll just call them factors. And F-A-C-T-O-R-S, and the physical and chemical environment, all right, this would be called the abiotic. All right, the abiotic structure. All right, basically and really an ecosystem is about this interaction between the biotic factors and the abiotic factors. Very, very important. So basically the ecological systems or ecosystems would be the structure of the living and non-living parts. You can see they have organization. The biological part of it is called the community. All right, so these would be the biotic factors, things like plants, microbes, animals live there, all the different species of animals. The plants and animals interact in a variety of ways, including the ways in which they feed on one another. If you remember, we saw a little bit in I'll just put a note here, in our Yellowstone video. And if you remember, that was really about how basically altered the ecosystem of the entire, in effect, the entire park. Ecosystem processes include both the biogeochemical cycling and energy flow, all right? And ecosystems also undergo continual change. Continuals are the operating word there for it. Some changes are predictable, like e.g. succession, some are not. So this is a succession can be predicted. All right. So an ecosystem is the minimal entity that has all the properties required to sustain life. All right. So basically, this is the, and we're going to learn about things like the geomorphological boundaries. We'll learn about a term called the watershed, which is like basically like a drainage area, and boundaries of a pond. All right. One thing I want to put here is that chemicals, all right, chemicals will recycle. All right, in an ecosystem. All right, energy does not. No cycling, but a one-way flow. No cycling. So the energy really isn't reused per se, but the energy is basically cycles in and out. So I'll say one way through an ecosystem. All right, so this would be matter, the nitrogen, the chemicals like nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and so forth. We can also look at sulfur. There's a sulfur cycle to look up at. The N, P, and C are the big ones, okay? So those are some key concepts of a ecosystem. And then a couple of, on the second page here of these notes, I'd like to go over a couple of things with you on the communities and food chains. This gets to some of the information that we talked about today, which I thought you guys did a nice job on giving me some feedback on how familiar you were with some of these particular terms. But a functional aspect is how energy and materials are transferred from one to another along food chains. So the food chain would be from one level to another. So a food chain. Whereas a food web can be all kinds of. A food web shows a multiple of different pathways, if you will, that energy, all possible pathways that basically food or energy is transferred, okay, moves up the air. The species that live in an ecosystem can be classified according to how they function or derive energy. I want to interject that other handout that we had here, and then I've got a diagram that I'd like to show to you as well. This was from earlier today, and I'll just put that as 1017. All right, and a couple of other terms I want to show here. The producers would be autotrophs, as we talked about, which would be green plants and algae. These are called the primary producers down here. If there are some primary producers that do not have exposure to light, they can still make their own energy through breaking, basically breaking chemical bonds. So let's look at a couple of other terms here. Producers, green plants and algae, if they have light, these would be called photoautotrophs. All right, photoautotrophs with light, sunlight. And auto means they make their own food, okay? Photo would be exposure to light. If they don't have light, these would be called chemoautotrophs. All right, and an example, I'm going to put e.g. for example, sulfate reducing bacteria. All right, sulfate reducers are basically will break that sulfate bond. These are called desulfovibrio. You don't have to remember that, but you do have to remember sulfate reducing bacteria. And all right, so now we're going to look at so we've got consumers, heterotrophs, carnivores, omnivores, and decomposers. I think we talked about most of these today. Consumers would be the animals that can't make their own food, so they have to consume other organisms for their sustenance. Decomposers are very, very big. Bacteria and fungi. They decompose leaves and old vegetation, basically decompose vegetation, leave the nutrients for that. If you had an example like cut grass would be one.
Mystery.
All right, cut grass would be an example of a decomposes. All right, so cut grass decomposes. It leaves the nutrients, leaves the inorganics, or it leaves the inorganics like nitrogen and phosphorus behind, and that way they can be used to fertilize the grass. Good example of this, a golf course is nice and green, and they will cut, a real nice golf course will actually cut their greens every day. And as a result of that, that's a lot of phosphorus that constantly gets put back into the system. And that's why that's one of the reasons they're nice and green for it. And then we looked at trophic levels represented by numbers. The bottom level would be so if you looked at a triangle, something like this. Okay, I'm going to show this here with level, all right, 1. This would be level 1. This would be level 2. And again, the level 1 would be your primary producers. The level 2 would be your primary consumers. Level 3, basically the secondary consumers. Level 4, all right, and again, the level 4 would be your carnivores, which are, in effect, eat other carnivores, which are tertiary consumers. And level 5 would be the apex. All right, those would be the apex predators that there's. All right, you can see how the food is lost. The amount of food is lessened as you go up this food chain, hence the triangular effect. And a few predators are around. Not enough food. Not enough food for them. And then I have a diagram that I'd just like to show to you that I came across. This just basically shows this cycle between a producer. You can see from the sun, everything emanates from the sun. Photosynthesis, right here, producer, P, and photosynthesis, P. This would be the green plants, grass. Primary consumer, this would be level 2, could be an example of a grasshopper. The frog could be a secondary consumer consuming the grasshopper. The raccoon could consume the frog. That could be these are tertiary consumers here. The owl, it's maybe consuming the frog. And then the decomposers would be your bacteria and fungi. All right, cycling. Remember, this is inorganic. Chemical cycling. Okay, energy goes in one way, so I could look at it. Chemicals would cycle around an ecosystem. Okay, cycles in and out of an ecosystem. All right, whereas energy, basically the energy for an ecosystem, in effect, starts with the sun, goes through the ecosystem, and leaves as heat. All right, dissipated as heat with that. So, and we'll look at some laws of thermodynamics a little bit later on. All right, so that's a little bit of an introduction to